but back then they were the Department of Attorney General and Justice. They put out a tender across New South Wales to all the unis saying, we want a Designing Out Crime Research Centre. And UTS was, I think, the only university to answer from that tender from the design school. All the others answered from the criminology school, because it's usually criminology that deals with crime. So luckily, for me anyway, because now I work at UTS, which is great, UTS won that tender and we've been around for about 5 years. So I want to talk to you a bit about how we see design, a bit about how we situate ourselves with government agencies, and give a bit of a case study on how we work. I've got heaps of slides too, so I'll go really. One of the key sort of value propositions that UTS put forward at the beginning was that they saw design as the creation of value, not as the creation of objects like barbed wire fences, CCTV, extra lighting. Design is a process that allows you to understand complexity and create value. Innovation also is important. So we've given ourselves the not too easy task at Designing Out Crime with my colleague Melanie and Mika here, helping deliver on this responsibility. We promise that we'll become a centre for excellence in innovation in crime prevention, an international centre for excellence in crime prevention, which is it's going to be awesome. I don't know when we're going to get around to doing that, but if you look at innovation, and Jane mentioned a conference that we've spent the last couple of days at, and they were putting forward an innovation model called behavioural insights. But if you look at innovation, it's a bit like our superannuation portfolio. There's lots of different investments in there. So in innovation, there's lots of different tools to innovate, to create new ways of working. So you can get incremental stuff, 2-4% a year improvements, or you can go for the radical and anywhere in between. Because we like making life hard for ourselves, we've developed and have at our core quite a radical innovation model called frame creation. It's been developed by our Professor Cass Dorst after 20 odd years of research into how designers solve complex problems. Now, why do we make it so hard for ourselves? Because organisations are struggling to solve problems. This is an image of JFK and his team during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Business use this as an example, a good case study of groupthink and of how organisations need to look at the way they solve problems and make adjustments where necessary and where possible. So just really briefly, early in the administration, a whole bunch of stuff happened in Cuba and more broadly in the geopolitical environment with Russia. And that stuff that happened made it necessary for the administration to implement the toughest thing they could do. So they invaded the Bay of Pigs, and it was a complete disaster, and people died, and it was terrible. But they learnt from that. So they reviewed their decision-making process, and they realised that, okay, if the worst thing in the world that could happen to us happens, we're only going to make it worse if we do the biggest, baddest thing in response to that. So if we put a countermeasure in place against those very difficult circumstances, we're only going to make things worse. So when the Cuban Missile Crisis came around, we didn't get World War III because they'd adjusted the way they solved problems. They realised that by just taking a countermeasure approach, that they weren't going to make it better. So they changed the way they thought as an organisation. And that's important. In crime prevention, we traditionally operate under two models of conventional problem solving. So in the world of crime prevention, we like to use the SARA model. So SARA is kind of evidence-based, and it stands for scan the environment for what other people have done, analyse which of those is going to be the best fit for your current situation, respond by implementing it, and then assessing the effectiveness of that approach. And that's probably great 9 out of 10 times. The divide and conquer approach, it's also kind of talked about as the engineering approach, is where you map out a problem, break it down into really small parts, and then solve those individual parts. And okay, that's a pretty good way of solving problems, and the Babylonians thought that too in 200 BC when they wrote about it. So fine, that might work. most of the time. And it might work if the problem is complicated and can be broken down. But if these two tools are the only problem-solving methods you've got in your toolkit, then you're going to be in trouble when you hit a complex problem. So I mentioned before the model that we've developed under case laws. So this is a 9-step process based on how designers work. And we, at Designing Out Crime, have developed a bunch of methodologies, a bunch of tools to support each of these steps. And we've turned them into method cards that fly. Just be careful, because... So each of these sort of draws on different expertise that we have at Designing Out Crime. Yeah. When they hit you in the face, it doesn't hurt, don't worry about it. So we've got 14 people at Designing Out Crime from a bunch of different disciplines, like architecture, industrial design, psychology, history. And as a team, we looked at our skill set, we looked at all the projects that we'd done, and we worked out what tools did we use in those. I keep throwing these out while I talk. I just keep hitting the same person, and I really don't want to do it again. So a bunch of different tools, including sort of co-design tools, including ethnographies, including sort of really technical stuff like space syntax to analyse the space. And we do that because we know that some problems can't be solved in the traditional ways. So when an organisation comes to us, be it state government, local government, and they've tried everything within their powers, we know that we need to move beyond the traditional problem-solving approaches. And I kind of liken it to two different types of problems. So if something's complicated, it can be broken down and understood. So the A380 is a very complicated machine, but every element of that can be understood. It's like there's a manual for it somewhere, probably weighs more than the Airbus itself, but there's a manual, you can understand it. But if something's complex, then it's open in nature. You can't draw a circle around it. It's dynamic, it moves around in time, and it's networked. There's more than one problem there. So we need a different approach. Now, before I worked at Designing Out Crime, I worked at the Attorney General's Department. And I sat on a, what do we call it? Something like whole of government response group or something. I don't know. It was 10 years ago, a long time ago. We were looking at ways of preventing alcohol-related violence in King's Cross. So what happened was Premier's Department drew together a whole bunch of state government agencies, and we looked at what was within our power to influence. So Transport looked at transport, the Liquor and Gaming Agency looked at licensing, and so on. Police looked at more police and ID scanners and stuff. And we came up with a suite of things that got implemented, and one of them was this. So the drunk tank. Have you guys heard of the drunk tank? Okay. So some of you have. I call myself a designer now. I haven't always, and this is why. This is my drawings. If you're out in King's Cross, just for example, and you're drunk, and the police notice that you're drunk and ask you to go home, and if you refuse to go home, then they can take you down to the police station, put you in a car, I swear that's a car, drive you 2 kilometres to Central Local Court, and get you assessed, this is so embarrassing, by a medico. And if you are drunk and there's something not else wrong with you that means you shouldn't be arrested, then you're handed over to a sheriff. It's a sheriff. They then lock you in a holding cell at Central Local Court for 4 hours until you sober up. And then if you agree to go home at the end, then they fine you $200 for your pleasure and send you on your home. Now, looking at this objectively and looking at some of the costs involved, I did a bit of a breakdown just on publicly available data and found that costs the state about $1,000. Costs the state about $1,000, and there's only 8 drunk tanks available. In King's Cross, on a good year, on a good night, there's 30,000 people out in the King's Cross on a Friday or a Saturday night. So 8 lock-up tanks, it's not going to solve the problem. Okay? It might be the answer to the question, if the question is what tools can we give police to better do their job? Yep, sure, they might appreciate that. But it's not actually going to solve the problem. Even as a suite of things, it's not going to solve the problem. So we were thinking that if the problem is approached as if it's a police problem or a crime problem, then the response can only ever be a police or criminology response. But if the problem's approached through a new frame, so a new way of looking at it, then the response can be open, engaging, and can create new value. So with the support of City of Sydney and New South Wales Police and a number of venues, this is the King's Cross Hotel, we held a conference in December 2012 and invited international criminologists, designers, community members, councils, and we held a half-day workshop in the King's Cross Hotel, sort of unpacking some of the issues about, okay, if we shouldn't look at it as a police problem anymore, what should we look at it as? So we looked at it as a design problem, and we used our frame creation model. I'm going to now give you an example, and I'm really just going to focus on the ones in red, so themes and frames. Design and the way we practice, so yes, it's about economic growth, but it's also about safety and vibrancy. If you look at the patrons, then they're there to blow off steam, be loose. They want to have a diverse experience. They're there for the edginess. They're there for the friends. Look at the residents. They're really interested in liking where they live. They really value where they live. So you can see that by digging a bit deeper into this, start to get to a bit more depth than just, oh, it's an alcohol-related assault problem. So this is a workshop tool that we use at Designing Out Crime for the Design Innovation Research Centre. So taking all of those values that we've identified, again it's post-it notes, we start to cluster them. And you know, the page I showed you before, there's like 50 things there. So pull all those off and then put them into clusters of like concepts, things that make sense together. Again, we're abstracting away from the problem and we're just focusing on the words. When we've got a cluster like that, we want to then give it a name. So this one, fun, experience, vibrancy, friends, diversity, be seen. We thought that that was about identity forming. We thought that that group of words was, you know, really describing identity forming. So one of the things we do at Designing Out Crime, not as often as I'd like, is on a Friday afternoon, we start drinking in the workplace. And we start unpacking some of these issues. So if it's about identity forming, what is identity forming? Let's share a personal story within our team about when we've gone through something that helped us form our identity. Then over the weekend we might read a novel or watch a movie or have kind of YouTube or Spotify battles on crappy 1980s pop songs about identity forming. And then we get back together and we ask the question, well, we thought it was about identity forming. We've had a bit of a think about it now. Actually, we think it's about a rite of passage. So, okay, if King's Cross is about a rite of passage, and all of those organisations that are involved there are invested in creating that rite of passage, where else in the world do you see 30,000 young people coming together as part of a rite of passage? Of course, the answer is a music festival. So, okay, if we've got a music festival in King's Cross every Friday and every Saturday night, we might want to think about talking to event organisers about how they manage these events. We might also engage a bunch of students to explore kind of what that looks like in the space. Sorry, I've got a really cool fly through here, but it's not. I think it's online. But essentially, what we found when we did this exploration, there we go, is that if you took this literally, and we never really meant it to be taken literally, then you'd bring in lots of portable urinals. There's only 2 portable urinals in the King's Cross precinct. You'd have a diverse range of marquees selling food. I've been to Europe, I've seen people eat ice cream after midnight. They do it, they do drink coffee if you give it to them. You might have some magical mirrors like in a fun fair. The point is you bring in a whole bunch of different activities to distract away from the alcohol. You bring in managed public transport to bump people in and bump people out. So, we put this package of design explorations together, not to say this is exactly what you should do in King's Cross, but to say if you were going to treat it like a music festival, here's a bunch of things that you could do, and then leave it with the government agencies to think, well, what can we do of that list? And so City of Sydney have been a big supporter of our work over time, and they've implemented a number of things. The work with them goes back 5-6 years, and so coming out of that collaboration, and certainly the framing of it as a music festival was done through collaboration. Precinct ambassadors in King's Cross, portable urinals, managed taxi stands, a bunch of stuff. So they've been a real dream to work with. We can kind of see stuff that was just an idea or a concept, and they've taken it and run with it. Other state government agencies have also been in the discussions. Last year, when this was made, we did a report and had the Premier's Department involved, and the people we were working with there had the report that we printed, student work. So, these are undergrad students contributing to real problem solving. They had that report on the Premier's desk within an hour, and they were chuffed when they heard that. Okay, so designing out crime, I realise I've gone over time. We've done a bunch of stuff that's been implemented. If you ever catch the train, you'll see these bins, we did that. If you shoplift in Neutral Bay, Woolworths, then watch out for this. Shelby Community Centre got a renovation, and this is one of our very proud and recent projects, an intensive learning centre in corrective services, built with prisoners, so designed and built with prisoners, and with the education people, security people up there. I mentioned so from the Design Innovation Research Centre, we're doing a bunch of stuff. We're a bit chuffed with designing out crime, so we want to expand on that. We've been doing some work recently with the New South Wales Public Service Commission, teaching this methodology to the senior executive and trying to show them how design can be used as strategy. So that's a bunch of work that's happening. Also working with the New South Wales Office of Local Government. We've partnered with the New South Wales Government Architects Office, so they're really the state government design thinkers that we're working with in developing a bunch of stuff. But we also want to develop a resilient cities node. So to ask the question, what is a resilient city? What kind of city do we want? Working on education innovation. So in-house at UTS, we've just launched the Bachelor of Creative Intelligence and Innovation. We've got 180 students doing that degree, as well as their primary degree. Working with TAFE New South Wales. And then in the private sector, doing some work with CSIRO around manufacturing competitiveness and using design-led innovation with the South Australian Department of Manufacturing, Innovation, Trade, Resources and Energy. All of that is really about embedding design as a way of working within organisations. So it's about doing demonstration projects like this to prove concept, and then to get it picked up as strategy, so design as strategy. Once design is adapted or adopted as strategy, then we go about capacity building, so teaching people within those organisations how to get out there and run a co-design session, or how to do user journey mappings or personas or whatever. So that's all I had, and I think I'm a couple of minutes over time, so thank you.